Hello everyone. Today's lesson is going to be on rates and unit rates. This is following the Big Ideas Math Green textbook, Chapter 5, Section 3. We have three important vocabulary words or terms for this section: rate, unit rate, and equivalent rates. A rate is a ratio, which is something we just learned, of two quantities. Now remember, anytime we say quantities, we kind of just mean two numbers. But a rate is a ratio of two quantities using different units. And we're going to talk about what those units just might be on the next slide. A unit rate compares a quantity to one unit of another. And these can be very important. So when we say a quantity, that could be any quantity. We're not specifying it all. But when we say one unit of another, that's the really important part, is we're going to be comparing a number to one. And last but not least, for equivalent rates, this is going to use the above definition because equivalent rates have the same unit rate. To kind of show how we're moving on from ratios into rates, I want to talk about some of the ratios that we've done previously. So in ratios, we would look at, over here on this left side, we'd look and talk about things like apples to oranges and boys to girls and hot dogs to hamburgers, just for a couple examples. And now as we get into rates, we're actually going to be talking about things like miles per hour and beats per minute and dollars per pound. And the difference between these things is that on the right here, all of these are units of measurement. Now what they're measuring can be a little bit different, but they are measuring something. Versus on the left, when we talk about things like apples to oranges, those are more, I can just best say it's their things. And the thing about apples and oranges is, while we know the difference between apples and oranges, every apple can be a little different. Some apples are bigger than others, some are smaller. We've got red apples, green apples, yellow apples. Same can be said for boys to girls and hot dogs and hamburgers. While they are classified as all of those things, they are also a little bit different. Versus looking on the right, again at rates, a mile is a mile. A mile, what we call a mile in Wisconsin is the same as what might be called a mile in Illinois. Same for things like minutes. A minute is the same length no matter where you are. Same with dollars, pounds, etc. So this is kind of those units of measurement are a lot more specific. And as we get in and we keep talking about rates, we'll see how these things like miles per hour and beats per minute, how those go together. For our first example, we're going to look at a scenario that uses a rate. So you and your family are going on a road trip, you get on the highway and are driving 60 miles per hour. Now 60 miles per hour is a rate because we're comparing the miles and the hour. But let's go a little bit deeper into what this really means. So when you are using rates, you are essentially taking the same scenario and you're talking about it in two ways. So what I mean by this is our little person in their car going on the road trip, you and your family. One person might think about your road trip as kind of in miles, all right? So if I make a number line just to kind of represent this person knows that, all right, this is our start, so we're kind of at 0 miles here, and okay, down the road, maybe we're at 60 miles, and then we keep going, and now we're at 120 miles, and then we keep going, and we're at 180 miles, and then maybe a little bit more, and we're at 240 miles. Now, I'm not disregarding that, maybe at some point you were at 30 miles or 50 miles. I'm just going to count by what they gave us here in this rate. So every 60 miles, that's where you're at. Now, on the flip side of this is somebody else in your family might be thinking about this trip in hours instead of in miles. And what's going to end up happening is, well, if you're thinking about it in miles, well, when you've gone 60 miles, that's the same as when you've gone 1 hour. This is kind of that rate. And the same is going to apply here again, that, okay, well, when you are at 120 miles, that's going to be 2 hours into your trip, and then that next kind of line would be 3 hours and 4 hours. And what we're essentially creating is we're counting this rate, this comparison of miles to hours and how they match up. And using what I've created here, which is a double number line, this is going to kind of match up. And I actually can take all these lines and just connect them together because, on that trip, everyone in your family's in your car together, when you've gone 60 miles, pending stops and traffic and things like that. But if you're just driving 60 miles, that's an hour into your trip. And then when you're at 120 miles, it's 2 hours in your trip. Okay, so rate is essentially taking these two units of measurement and comparing and how do they match up. For this next problem, I actually have created the double number line right away because I want to see you practice writing rate. Now, the biggest thing about when you write a rate is you must use words. Now, in a ratio, we could get away with numbers and like a colon or using a slash. In a rate, you must use words, and you're going to hear me refer to this as rate language. Now, in this double number line, because I didn't give you a word problem, the first thing you want to notice is you are comparing points and notes. So this would be kind of like a video game, maybe like Guitar Hero sort of thing. So we can see that the points are along the top here and the notes are here on the bottom. We can see that where they kind of connect together all the way through, and then I could circle all of them, and then there are the arrows on the end, meaning that this keeps going. So when you see a double number line, you're often going to be asked, okay, write a rate. So there's limitless number of rates that you could write, but the first one somebody might write would be that you could have 150 points per hour, or per note, sorry. Okay, that would be one acceptable rate. Another rate might be something like, maybe I grab this one up here, 750 points for 5 notes. Okay, now any of these would be correct. You could name any of these rates, and as long as you wrote it out in words, you would be okay. One challenge I like to give to students is to maybe always try to, what would be that next rate? And in this case, what I hope you notice is that we are actually counting by 150, so adding 150 at the top, and then we're counting by ones on the bottom. So take a second, what would this next rate be? It would be 900 points in 6 notes. For this next example, I would like you to write down 2 rates. I want you to write one rate that you see right on the number line, and then I would like you to write the rate for the next rate that we don't see. So pause this video and write those rates now. I'm going to continue on and write 2 rates. It may or may not be the exact ones you have. So the rate I see, I might write down 200 meters in 30 seconds. And I'm going to shorthand seconds here, which is okay. And then for this next rate, because I asked you to write both of those, the next rate would be, all right, what am I counting by on top? I'm counting by 100. So this would be 600 meters in, and then when I'm counting by 15 on the bottom, so I'd have to add 15 here, 90 seconds. For the last bit of this video, we are going to talk about finding unit rates. So in a unit rate, we are given just a generic rate. So for example, 45 miles in 6 hours. When I solve unit rates, the first thing I like to do is I'm actually going to take this rate and I am going to write it kind of in like we did ratio form or ratio/fraction form. So 45 miles in 6 hours, feel free to shorten those labels. Now, to get this to a unit rate, I know I need the rate for 1. I don't want to know how many miles in 6 hours. I want to know how many miles in 1 hour. So we can go back to how we worked with ratios, and I would look at this and go, hey, well, if I want to go from 6 to 1, I'm going to divide by 6. And then that ultimate rule of math, what I do to one, I need to do to the other. So 45 divided by 6, and then this is where using your calculator is totally okay. I know that 45 divided by 6 is 7.5. And then just make sure that you write your answer out in good rate language. So I would say 7.5. Oops, I put the wrong label up here. Excuse me for that. 7.5 miles per hour. That would be my final answer. Okay, so when you want to find a unit rate, you just need to take usually that bottom number, take it from whatever it is to 1, and that's a unit rate. So let's see if you can go ahead and find the unit rate for these 3 problems. Pause your video now. I'm going to start going over the answers in a little bit. So pause, try solving them, and let's see if we get the same thing. So take a look. These are my 3 answers for the unit rates. You will notice for each one I kind of set them up in that fraction form. And then I just really thought about for this first problem, I had to divide top and bottom by 3. For the second one, I divided top and bottom by 12. And for the third problem, I divided by 5. But also equally important is that my final answers were all written with good rate language. Typically in a unit rate, you will always be able to use that word per, but I also included the labels for everything. So take a pause, double check those answers. This concludes our videos on rates and unit rates. Feel free to look back through if you didn't understand, or let me know if you have questions.